So we are encouraging everyone throughout today's event to join us on social media. So we do have a toolkit we can share in the chat. We've been organizing for the last year and a half around a just and equitable recovery post-pandemic. And as we've seen, there has been neither just nor equitable anything when it has come to the issue of access to vaccines and to medicines. And many of us understand that, for the majority of our communities, particularly in the global South, access to vaccines and medicines has never been an easy thing to achieve. And we're definitely seeing throughout this pandemic the ways that those in the North, the ways that the pharmaceutical industry continue to exploit and to profit off of the loss of life and the loss of our community. And so we've been organizing to demand that the WTO and those in power lift the patents and to allow for a very minimum ask, which is a waiver on intellectual property rights as it relates to vaccines. So today we've got an incredible lineup of speakers who are going to be sharing their experiences, sharing some of the organizing that they're doing to really bring about truly equitable and just recovery. So we are a little bit behind schedule, so I think we're actually going to just jump right into our first section. So I'm going to pass it to Hien, who's going to offer a quick intro for our first speaker.
Thanks a lot, Basma, and hello everyone. Welcome to our global rally. I'm very excited for our event. So I'd like to introduce to all of you our first speaker, Asra Talat Sayed. So Asra is a founder and also an executive director of the Roots for Equity Pakistan, and she also a member of program organizing committee of Women Interrogating Trade and Corporate Hegemony program in Asia Pacific Forum on Women Law and Development. So Asra is an amazing feminist working closely with several grassroots community in Pakistan and at the global level as well. And she inspired a lot of young women, including me, myself, to advocate for women human rights. So you may find her name and her face familiar in many regional and also international advocacy spaces. So today we have Asra here with us to share about the trade-related aspect of the intellectual property rights. In short, it's TRIPS, as many of us know. And without further ado, I just hand it over to Asra. Asra, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hein. It's very, very nice to hear young women speak well of you. I think that's a big honor, to me at least. So anyway, I will just go straight to the topic, and maybe Basma, you can start sharing. Thank you. And should I just say next? Would that work for you? Okay. Great. So as everybody knows, the WTO 12th Ministerial is almost on its way, and it's of major concern to all of us. So the issue of the TRIPS waiver has been being highlighted everywhere. But since I'm the first speaker, I will just say that for most of the activists, for many of the movements across the world, whether they are in the healthcare sector or with farmers or whatever perspective people come from, we generally do not talk about TRIPS only. We talk about the whole context of where WTO is. So maybe next, please. So I would like to start with saying that one cannot look at TRIPS in isolation, and one really has to look at it in the context of where is it lodged. It's lodged in a terrible organization called the World Trade Organization, and it is actually at the behest of very, very imperialist countries, especially the United States, the whole context of capitalism and the way capitalist institutions, the traders, the industrialists have been raping the world left and right. And so it's very important to talk about who is behind this. And of course, we, especially the third world, know very well that WTO is led by the United States and other G7 countries, especially the European Union. So next, please. I would like to start with that the WTO has 60 agreements in it. And it's not only TRIPS, it's not only the aspects of intellectual property rights that we have to worry about, but today we will, of course, focus on TRIPS. I just wanted to emphasize that the WTO is like it could be a octopus, it could be a spider, and it has many, many hands, even more than the 8 hands. Because if it has 60 agreements, then it really has 60 hands. Come and squeeze us in terms of our livelihood, in terms of our water resources, our seed, food, markets, land, and especially in the context of what is happening in the world right now, health. Next, please. So what is the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights? I would like to emphasize that they deliberately put in the word aspects of, because otherwise intellectual property rights have got nothing to do with trade. But because the entire world economy, especially the capitalist institutions, are run by corporations, they needed this kind of a lock on what they call inventions or what they call scientific knowledge. But we all know that scientific knowledge is meant for serving the people. It is not meant for profits. But the context of TRIPS is to actually capture all innovation, all new knowledge into the hands of those who make a lot of profits out of this knowledge. Next, please. When we talk about TRIPS, there are a number of aspects of intellectual property rights that you need to know. Number one are patents itself, and that's what we are fighting right now. We are fighting that TRIPS waiver in the context of pharmaceutical medicaments, in the context of the vaccine, but really in the context of health. Another area of TRIPS is the copyrights. Copyrights is, of course, on books, on these very branded clothes, designs, and a whole range of other copyrights materials. Then we also have something called the geographical indications, which basically means that if certain product is associated with a country or a particular geographical area of the world, it is called GI, meaning it is now geographically indicated. For instance, basmati rice is from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And so it's the South Asia, a number of countries of South Asia are known for basmati rice, and there's a big patent fight happening on that as well. The next one is design processes. So when you start building a product, you actually work around like artistic designs. You develop it physically, and that is called industrial designs. And that is also property. It is also considered a property right, and it is heavily guarded by the TRIPS agreement. The fifth one is IC, or integrated circuits. These are the workings of all digital technology. You know, when we have our mobiles in the very early years, everybody used to talk about IC. It is a chip that we insert into our mobiles, into our cameras, into all things which we are using in terms of digital electronic goods. And lastly are the logos. What are logos, or what are, we call them trademarks also. Logos is more colloquial, but trademarks is, we all know, like the Apple of Mac, the Coca-Cola of Coca-Cola itself, and McDonald's. So the logos are also very much a context of protecting intellectual property rights. So next one is, if you go to the next screen. When we talk about TRIPS, go back please. When we talk about TRIPS, we actually are talking about the corporations and the kind of money, the kind of profits that they are accumulating from the use of TRIPS. It could be something very stupid which they invent, but once they put a brand name on it, which they put a tab on it, it really means that only the corporation which has made that product is going to make the money out of it. It only has the right to produce it. So from there, I will now come to pharmaceuticals, which what we are really talking about right now next. So when we talk about TRIPS, in terms of pharmaceuticals, in terms of medicaments, there are three uses. So they patent the product. So I will work with aspirin, just to give you an explanation. So if the product is aspirin, which is, everybody knows, it's a painkiller. They have a patent on the product aspirin itself. The second, next please, the second level of patenting is the process. How was that drug made? Or in any kind of engineering, the process of creating a product is also patented. And so then that means that you have a patent on the product, how you made it, which is called the process. And next, please, the use. So let me give you an example. We all know aspirin as a medication for killing pain. You know, if we have back pain, if we have any kind of muscular pain, we generally end up taking aspirin. But later on, they found another use for aspirin, and that was as a blood thinner. When some people have a certain disease in which their blood starts thickening, and a generally prescribed drug is aspirin. Now, what is the problem? That the pharmaceutical industry, generally under the TRIPS agreement, is allowed to keep a 20-year patent on a product. And if suddenly that product finds another use, it slaps another 20 years on that product again. And so, in essence, the pharma industry has such a clutch on medicines, on life-saving medicines, on ordinary medicines, on everything, that the people really suffer, as we can see under the whole COVID pandemic. It's very well projected. This was what we had feared 25 years ago when TRIPS was being developed, when the WTO was being made. Everybody in the world stood up and said, we don't want the WTO, junk WTO, dismantle WTO. And today, 25 years later, we have seen the impacts. Next, please. It's very critical to understand that our body is made up of different organs. So we could have lung issues like we are seeing in COVID. We could have heart issues. They're generally called cardiovascular diseases. We could have stomach issues, which are called gastrointestinal diseases. And the pharma industry has a habit of kind of only working around one organ. So what happens is, even if there are like 50 pharma industries in the world, maybe 5 or 6 will work around one organ. So they have a huge monopoly on the particular drugs that they manufacture for ailments which are connected to any of our organs. So we don't know very well, in the seed industry, we know that 5 corporations only hold 67% of the seed sector. And in the pharma industry, if we go through them very carefully, we will find that a very few number of corporations actually hold the entire human body in their hands in terms of giving medication. Next, please. And now this one says 1 million deaths, but I just checked again today, and we have surpassed 5.1 million deaths at the hands of COVID. And so you can imagine, just within a matter of a year and a half, almost 2 years now, November 17th, I think, was the first COVID case that was diagnosed. In 2 years, we have 5 million deaths. In an age of the 21st century, where during the very extreme tragedies that were happening across the world, 5 people sat on a shuttle and went across outside into space. They don't want to spend money on us, on looking after our miseries, our diseases, our health, but they will spend money on something which is very, very sick. And I just looked up, the World Health Organization is saying that there are 7 deadly viruses around, and we are only dealing with one as yet. I didn't want to put everything here on the screen, but just wanted to give you a sense. We are talking about TRIPS waiver around COVID, and we don't know what is around the corner, whether in a general health crisis or, God forbid, another pandemic which will erupt. Next, please. I wanted to emphasize, health is not only medicines. Health is also food. Health is also our livelihood. Health is also our environment. And the WTO has made sure that it has a stranglehold across all sectors of our life. Next, please. And I wanted to emphasize something which we at APWLD are nowadays looking at very, very closely is the dairy sector. You know, milk for South Asia is a blessing. In our homes, in our rural homes, people will just drink milk from their animals. If they don't have any food to eat, at least there is milk. And milk also yields butter, milk also yields ghee, or what you call clarified butter. Now they are patenting the genetic material of animals. So when they start patenting, on one side they have patented pharmaceuticals. We cannot get medicines that we need. And now they are playing with animals and creating special animals, which are called genetically modified organisms. At the same time, they're also patenting seeds. I just said only 5 corporations in the world have 67% of seeds. And if we have no seeds, just forget it. We may be able to live through a disease, but if we don't eat, we will not be able to get through more than a month. A maximum a person can go without food is a month. And so we are facing an extremely diabolical situation where these corporations are really out for getting us. Next, please. Is my time up, Basma? I can't hear you. Just give me 2 seconds. Give me 1 minute.
Yes, the time is up. Hurry up, hurry up.
Okay, just 1 minute. So this is all genetically modified organisms. These are cows which are really genetically modified. These hens have no wings, and this is cruel. You know, wings are meant for something. And so all I wanted to say is this, everything is now lab controlled. Next, please. And what we are facing now is that our world is in the hands of these corporations, whether it is energy, whether it is books, it is AI. Next, please. And that's the last slide. Next one, please. The only way we can deal with this is to ask for junk WTO, ask for dismantling of the WTO. We can have smaller campaigns like waiver trips or trips waiver, but that's not the end. Go for it. Kill the WTO before it kills us. And that's what it wants to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Azra. That was incredible. Really appreciate your presentation. So we're going to keep things moving. I'm going to invite Bobby to join us on the floor, although I'm not seeing. Oh, yes, Bobby, you're here. Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Basma. And our next speaker, friends, is Loon Gangtay. He's a co-founder of DNP Plus, Delhi Network of Positive People, a network of people living with HIV in Delhi, which he and his two of his friends co-founded to ensure everyone who needs treatment must receive it and no one should suffer or die because of lack of access to medicines, treatment, care or support which exists. Loon also leads the International Treatment Preparedness Coalition, ITPC, in South Asia. Loon has led from the front, friends, on the fight to access life-saving treatments, care and support services since years and years for people living with HIV, hepatitis C, people who use drugs, and several other human rights issues. When India claimed a lockdown at 4 hours' notice, it was Loon and his comrades and friends like him who rose to brave, police and other restrictions to home deliver life-saving medicines to thousands of people living with HIV in Delhi and around areas and other networks across the country so that no one faces treatment interruption. It's not just during COVID, it's even before he has pushed governments to deliver uninterrupted treatment to life-saving treatment to people across the country. So over to you, Loon. Loon is going to tell us more about lessons from HIV epidemic, Doha Declaration, yes. 20 years later.
Loon, if you can please request the floor. I'm not seeing you, so just, yes, if you hit the request button, request to speak. Well, it seems we may have lost Loon, in fact. I'm not seeing Loon, so let's go ahead and we'll come back to Loon. it seems like something, maybe there was an emergency that came up with Loon. Thank you, Lena, for letting us know. Oh, okay. So in fact, we actually have a little switch. So Lena, if you'd like to introduce yourself, it sounds like you will be speaking on behalf of Loon. But
yes. Yeah. So very quickly, having worked in the HIV networks for over 2 decades, I just would like to highlight 3 points on behalf of, the Delhi Network for Positive People and ITPC that Loon represents. One of them very clearly is that what we want is change and not charity. And we've seen this in the AIDS epidemic, that, people were losing their lives while life-saving antiretrovirals were available in high-income countries. And South Africa and countries like India, Thailand, and Brazil had to battle big pharma to gain access to these life-saving pharmaceutical medicines. While older and known medicines and vaccines are made extensively in the developing world, newer vaccines and medicines are often out of reach. A key example would be the manner in which life-saving cancer medicines, particularly biological medicines, have been denied to Black women and women of color in countries like South Africa and India due to intellectual property barriers from Roche. So I would like to highlight that we've already been through several years of inequity. And we've seen this very clearly, not just in HIV/AIDS, we see that in cancer, we see this in insulin, and a large number of these hold-on manufacturing and monopolies are built around the intellectual property system. And that is why people living with HIV have been supporting the campaign on a TRIPS waiver. And lastly, I would like to highlight is that at the time of the Doha Declaration, when a solution was sought to the AIDS epidemic, while high-income countries, along with other member states, recognized that developing countries had the right to issue compulsory licenses and also set their patent systems according to development needs. In reality, the high-income countries and the pharmaceutical industries that they house have worked to undermine those public health safeguards in our intellectual property law, and therefore asking countries to address those barriers through compulsory licenses is a double standard that the European Union is following. And therefore, to correct the injustice, this time around, there should be no ambiguity, and all intellectual property barriers, whether they exist on data, whether they exist as trade secrets on technology, or whether they actually exist as patents, should be allowed on life-saving medicines and vaccines. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lena. Thank you for that. We're now moving on to the next speaker, Dan Owala from People's Health Movement, Kenya. They're amongst the leaders in Kenya in the fight for health justice. Dan is going to share some reflections on the impact of privatization of our healthcare system and what we can do about it. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Debbie. Can you hear me? Okay, so I'm going to speak about, give a little bit background of our system. So back in 2010, we adopted a new constitution with a robust Bill of Rights, and it entrenched and recognized health as a right to every Kenyan. It then further introduced a two-tier system of governance with shared roles in terms of public service delivery. And in that regard, healthcare, to healthcare, the national government's role remained to formulate health policy and resource allocation and management of national referral hospitals. On the other hand, the 47 county or regional governments, if you like to call them that way, held the service delivery roles from level 1 to 5. Now, from that background, this was done with an intention of bringing services closer to people. And unfortunately, we have seen significant levels of corporate capture of key government institutions, including our very own parliament, that has been undertaking retrogressive policy reforms to encourage private actors to get into the business of healthcare provision, and therefore reversing the gains that were made from the universal health coverage agenda. So now our people are paying heavily and mainly seeking services from private hospitals owned by the capitalists whose end goal is profits. On prima facie, these policies seems well intended, but to increase private sector participation in healthcare, as you may understand, alongside chronic underinvestment in public system, have contributed to an explosion of for-profit private actors who often provide poor value for money and neglect public health priorities, pushing Kenya into further poverty and debts. And that has resulted into disastrous outcomes, especially for poor people. So privatizing healthcare has proven costly and has led to the neglect of many people who come from marginalized communities and people who live in low-income areas, who often fall into to the hands of low private providers who provide healthcare of low quality and of course is not regulated, and this results into severe human rights problems, including deaths that are not questioned. So the burden on public coffers has been significant, if you ask me. The private sectors have been promoted as a solution when public resources are deemed scarce. But its growth has been highly dependent on commitment of major resources from government coffers. So government now transfers billions of money to private sector annually, or subsidize access to private care, and pay for secretive PPP arrangements with global corporations, far from simply filling a purported gap left by an inefficient public health system. During the pandemic, just to give an example, it of course exposed a lot of contradictions. For example, weaknesses and failures of healthcare and its capital model of operation. So the private facilities were not part of frontline defenders, but rather an avenue to maximize profits at the expense of dying Kenyans. Further, only the wealthy could visit these facilities, leaving the poor to languish and die. So the pandemic has revealed capitalism is unsustainable and inconsistent with equality and human rights. And in the middle of this pandemic, of course, we saw manifestation of capitalism in the sense that private lenders like IMF could still afford to give huge amounts of money to Kenya with conditionalities to partner with private sector in utilizing the borrowed money. So this has further indebted our country, and we are in a crisis to provide healthcare and other public services. So, and this has shrunk our fiscal space. So we cannot just speak about privatization without challenging capitalism and its manifestation and its forms that it all comes with, and defend public services at all costs. And I agree with the last speaker, whatever is happening at possible, because the outcomes of decisions that are made there are actually hitting us with heavy negative impacts if you take example of where Kenya is now. I will end there unless if I still have more time, I can continue.
That's great. No, thank you so much, Dan. Absolutely spot on. I mean, when we're looking at what is the root of pretty much all of these issues, I think we all know where they all lie from. So really appreciate your intervention and offering that structural look at the pandemic, at the ways that our healthcare systems have been completely redesigned for the ultimate sake of profit, as opposed to what they should have been designed for, which is care. And with that, I'm going to pass it now to our comrades joining us from Colombia, from the Comité Ambiental en Defensa de la Vida, the Environmental Committee in the Defense of Life. Really excited. We have two speakers joining us from Colima in Colombia. We are joined first by Juan Felipe, Ospina, who is a health professional from the University of Colima. He's a campesino and a defender of life in all manifestations. And we will also be joined by Edison Sandoval, who is also a member of the comité. He has studied pharmacology and agroecology. He is the delegate for Colombia in the Observatory of Mining Conflicts in Latin America. And so we're going to start with Juan, and then we'll pass it to Edison.
Hi. Hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Juan Ospina from the organization Defense to Life in Colima. It's a territory affected by mining and energy projects, and today we have the opportunity of defending it and protecting it, because we always had into account that the environment, everything that surrounds us, is fundamental, that the human being is in a condition and has a quality of life that is so their health, which is a fundamental right that is important to all us, to keep that stability emotionally and physical. And today we have the opportunity to be here in this space. I want to focus on the issue of the WTO that unfortunately has given us the idea that thanks to the pandemic, today health is something fundamental, something that has to be important to us. But unfortunately, it should not be this way, because since a long time ago, health has always been a fundamental right. And today they're making us think that because of the pandemic, it is suddenly important. What has happened with other illnesses in the world that has caused many deaths, like dengue in Africa, in America. Even in Africa, more people have died because of dengue than COVID. And where's the WHO? Where are the preventive measures? No, they're not to be seen. Right now, Ebola, another illness that affected, and that is another virus in the whole world. No, unfortunately, COVID-19, an illness, a virus that has killed more than 5 million people in the world, today is a business. It has become a business. The health is a fundamental right, and the WHO is under the authority. It has the mandate to protect this well-being of the population, mentally and physically. But we have seen how it has been captured, not only by the pharmaceutical industry, but also of the industry of production of tobacco, alcohol, agrotoxics, and agrochemicals for so we have to talk, for example, about the industry of tobacco. What does it cause in people? Cancer, in the stomach, in the liver, in the lungs. It affects the respiratory system. What happens with agrotoxic? Thousands of pesticides are applied to the crops. And what does the WTO, the WHO, how does it allow that this happens? How do they allow that these products are applied in Colombia to the crops and food that people consume? How in the USA there is a multinational company, Monsalvo, that produces agrochemicals and herbicides, pesticides, and that the population that is part, that surrounds this industry is affected, and and that they are dying because of cancer, because of exposure to these products. What are they applying to soys in these very big crops? And this is what people consume, the whole world. So health is a fundamental right, but not only we have to understand it as what surrounds us, what affects health, what we consume, that is what affects our health. So, like we were saying, unfortunately, it has become a business. The pharmaceutical industry has captured the WHO and has turned it into a way of communication that expanded, that communicated to the whole world that we have to vaccinate ourselves. We need to be vaccinated. Well, now they make us vaccinate ourselves in all countries in the world, but they didn't think of a strategy before that would be preventive. When COVID-19 appears, if it is a pandemic, it turned into a pandemic. The best prevention measure they should have used by the governments and the organization would be closing airports, not allowing the transfer of people from country to country, because those were the ones that had the virus. No, they didn't do that. This is where the WTO preferred to keep commerce in normal ways instead of the health of the humanity. Now they make us forcibly to vaccinate ourselves, that several industries in the world, several pharmaceuticals are producing, like Pfizer and AstraZeneca. Here in Colombia, now they are vaccinating us with AstraZeneca and Pfizer, and then it seems that there's no problem. How many people in the world doesn't want to get vaccinated? Why? Because they know that there is something in the organism. They know that the vaccination can kill us. It is not effective, unfortunately. But since it was
just because of the time.
Ok, ya cierro. Entonces vemos que la Organización Mundial de la Salud dio...
They gave this opening, so the pharmaceutical industry sold us a vaccination and hid from us that the health, now that the health is important. And I give the word now to my colleague, Edison. Hi, greetings from Colombia for all the presenters and the people who are listening to us in this moment. For us, it is very important to have these spaces where we can manifest ourselves and where we can express the bad administration that we have seen from the different international organisms, entities like the WHO, and once again, in the context of a pandemic that has cost many lives. talking about Colombia and the rules that regulate ourselves, it is a fundamental right, health. Only 5 years ago, something that was worrisome because it highlights the fact that the failures that the health system shows in our country, these failures that took us to visualize how, in the context of a pandemic, there were no safeguards for the population that was vulnerable. They mandated, they were repressing, and many people that had how to feed themselves to subsist, they had to wear masks and alcohol and other elements for biosecurity that the state was not providing. A state that is corrupt, that highlighted the negligence and to handle and face a national health emergency, well, even globally. There is an issue that not only COVID became alive in the whole world and our country, but we could also see that there were very high numbers in Colombia. It is an entity of surveys that allows to reveal indicators. There are some numbers of deaths that were not necessary. They were not given the adequate and treatment attention. In 2020, more than 280,000 people died, not because of COVID. There was a total of 43,213 people that lost their lives until 31 of October 2020. One of the main reasons were the infectious diseases, and with 63,900 deaths because of this. There is a quantity of illnesses and diseases in our country that causes many deaths. It's not COVID, but COVID is the one that highlighted the fact that the incompetence and the bad administration from the WHO and also of the government representatives in Latin America. The elements of biosecurity increased their price even 3 to 5 times in the times of pandemic. Governors were stealing the markets that were destined to families that were the most vulnerable. Our communities, our indigenous communities and Afro-descendants and rural population were the groups most affected. Commerce and trade in informal sector is one of the main items of our GDP in Colombia. It was the most affected. Unfortunately, it continues. The failures continue in our system, in our health system, still. Despite everything that we have highlighted, nothing has worked. Laws are not useful in our health system if there is a preference to give more value to benefits and economical benefits and their preferences. And here in Colombia, like in the rest of the world, there are a few, that 1%, who benefits from this business of health, because it became a business in the whole world. And in countries like in ours, with so much corruption, it is even more unequal, to the point that today, to be one of the countries that is most biodiverse makes us also one of the countries with the biggest inequities. And the illnesses that today are suffered by the Colombian population are caused by agrotoxic substances because of these extractive projects. And this is why we give thanks for your invitation to participate and highlight these problems, and also the proposal to unite, to resist, even with threats and stigmatization and repression. They attacked the population that was only asking to the respect of their rights. We continue our fight in a dignified population that will continue the struggle always, like we've done always in our history, against extractive multinationals that also causes many illnesses that here in Colombia is more dangerous, the government, than the pandemic. And this has made us to protest on the street, to demand our rights. And women today, in the process of reivindication, where there's no section, it is only a demand for justice for women that is asking for its own space, not because of priorities for the government and the state. It is because of the needs that we have in our country. Many thanks for this space. I hope I can share other opportunities to highlight these issues and to unite in our collective struggle, because the big majorities are those who are in these difficult situations, but the population, when it unites, it makes evident the true power that it has. We're not going to be the shame of future generation. Many thanks to all of you.
Move into sort of the final piece of our first section, I think it's super important that we really recognize the extent of the corporate capture of our healthcare systems. Whether, these pharmaceuticals absolutely are taking advantage of this crisis. But we do know that the product that they have, these vaccines, they do work, and it's unfortunate that there is so much hesitancy, and it's not surprising that so many of our communities are untrustful of these big pharmaceutical corporations, because these are the same corporations that are exploiting us. And so it is absolutely a reality and a dilemma that I think many of us are facing as we, both need these life-saving vaccines, but also know that they're coming from companies that don't care about our life. And so it is definitely a struggle that we've seen and that we're trying to work through. And I just want to highlight that earlier this year, ESCR-Net published a really important comic on the corporate capture of our healthcare systems that I really would recommend folks take a look at, and we'll share the link in the chat. But what we're seeing right now with COVID, unfortunately, is not new, right? We have seen how there is a long history of pharmaceutical companies taking advantage of crises. And, we don't have to look very far back to sort of see what that meant for folks in community. And so I'm going to pass it now to Mandy, who's going to introduce a really incredible speaker who's going to share some reflections that I think all of you will find really important. Mandy?
Thank you, Basma. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Our next speaker is Sibongile Chabalala. Sibongile is the national chairperson of the Treatment Action Campaign, in South Africa. She's a social justice activist whose leadership and voice has helped local and international awareness of health and rights issues affecting women and poor folks. Sibongile will share some insights from the struggle for ARVs in South Africa, connecting that history to access ARVs to what is happening right now with access to COVID vaccines and medicines. Sibongile, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mandy, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I'll be sharing mostly of the work that has been done by TAC from the early days of HIV in South Africa. I think all of us, we know that TAC was launched in 1998 in South Africa. After being years, HIV, it was available on the country, but none from our government was willing to take a responsibility to make sure that poor people on the ground are accessing life-saving antiretrovirus. We know that at that time, when TAC was launched, we were losing thousands of people on the ground. And mostly of those people who were dying are people who were depending on the public healthcare system because they couldn't afford to buy drugs. It was not the issue of not having drugs in the country, but drugs were under patent and the government was not willing to come and assist people to live. And as TAC and partners on the ground, we had to take it upon ourselves to make sure that we fight this fight. Today, we are talking about over 4 million people on ARVs out of 8 million people who are living with HIV in South Africa. But that struggle didn't just come easily because we had to fight first our government, who was denying that HIV can cause AIDS, and they were coming with all these nonsensical theories to say people, they should eat healthy, and when they eat healthy, they will survive more while they were dying. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was one of amongst those people who were diagnosed with HIV at the early days in the year 2000. And I always want to tell my story because it always gives a living example of what we were going through. At that time, when I was diagnosed with HIV, I was very young and I was still depending on my parents. And I'm coming from a family of 5 children and 2 parents. And my dad was the only person who was working at home, and he was not earning much. He was just earning a minimum wage for the family to survive, to live for a month. And for my family to take out about 5,000 rands to 6,000 rands to buy me medication, it will mean that the whole family will starve. So that was too much for my family. So we had to depend on the public healthcare system. And when I was diagnosed with HIV, I didn't have much information about ARVs. What helped me to understand is to learn from organizations like TAC, where we had a program of treatment literacy, where they were giving people information on the ground for us to learn to say, what is this HIV and how can we save ourselves from this HIV? From 2000 to 2006, my life or my health was very weak. I would know that at least 3 or 4 times a year, I need to be hospitalized because of different illnesses. I will be in and out of hospital, but I never got what I was supposed to get, which are ARVs at that time. What I was getting are just pain tablets or something, medication that will just try to treat what it's affecting me at that time. But the real life-saving medicines were not there. TAC fought. We know that in 2002, TAC won a case against the government to avail treatment for people living with HIV. Although we won the case in 2002, but it took another 2 years for the government also to make sure that we access ARVs. And at that time, everything was done very slowly, which most people, we lost them during that time. after fighting the government, we had to fight now this monster, big pharma in South Africa, where they were not willing to lower prices. They were not willing to give government a compulsory licensing where the government can be able to buy the cheaper generics medicines from countries like India and other countries that are able to make ARVs very cheap. And at that time, we had to join hands with the government and fight these pharmaceutical companies. But at the end of the day, as much as we won that fight, we are still suffering as people in South Africa. As I'm talking to you, I think you have seen TAC being on the street day in, day out, fighting big pharma. We've been marching to Roche, marching to Johnson & Johnson because of non-availability of other medicines like your cancer medicines that are very extremely expensive in South Africa. Even the person who has medical aid, who can be able to buy health from the private sector, cannot afford. And most of medical aids in South Africa, they don't pay for those medicines of cancer treatment. As I'm talking to you today, we were marching to the Gauteng government as Treatment Action Campaign, Cancer Alliance, Section 27, MSF and other partners to say people are dying. As I'm talking to you, we have a list of more than 2,000 people who are just waiting for radiation. And it's not like the radiation machines are not available, are available. But because WTO doesn't protect our governments and doesn't stop these pharmaceutical companies from bullying our governments to buy these machines. At the end of the day, they don't know how to use them. At the end of the day, they also require to buy more things so that they can be able to provide healthcare services. As we are talking about COVID-19 these days, we have seen how governments have stood up because COVID-19 has affected all of us, and all of us, including them, and it was killing more of government officials, which on my side, I felt like it's a good thing because they will feel how we feel every time when we die. Helplessly while there is medicines. That is why we as activists, we are coming up to say all the governments, they should allow TRIPS waiver, not only on COVID-19, but all the pandemics, medicines that will assist in the pandemics that will come in the future. As we are talking to you in South Africa, the talk is talking about a fourth wave, which we are not sure what will happen. We have lost so many lives already in South Africa. We have lost about 80,000 people, more than 80,000 people since from last year, which is a huge number. But when you compare that number from the people that we are losing on TB yearly, you can tell that that number is very minimum. In South Africa, we are losing about 60,000 people due to TB, and 40% of those people are people living with HIV. But no one is putting maybe an investment on R&D of TB because TB doesn't affect those rich countries more. It affects poor people like us, countries like South Africa and African countries. No one is willing to invest on that. There is no research. But COVID-19, because it has affected everyone, we have seen how quickly countries and governments were willing to put money in making sure that we are able to fight COVID-19. So as Treatment Action Campaign and the organizations that we are working with, we are calling for all governments to take up the fight against big pharma. And WTO, please stop selling our lives. Our lives are not for sale. Our lives are meaningful to our families, our friends, and everybody. And all of us, we have a right to life like everyone. So that right, it needs to be respected by everyone in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sibongile. Absolutely, absolutely spot on. Really, really appreciate you sharing some powerful, powerful intervention. And exactly like you say, we know that because we've seen how COVID has affected everyone, we've seen a response that still prioritizes those in the global north. But these, other diseases are still affecting folks, right? We haven't seen the development on TB and all these other things that are affecting millions and millions. So I think, I really, really appreciate your commentary. Thank you so much. Debbie, move us along. We are moving and grooving. What's up? What's next?
We're now getting to the rally. Time to rally. This is going to be short messages from the ground. All rally speakers, please join the floor. I'm calling on Mina, Isa, Marta, Mandy, Alejandra, Alana, Lina, Ohene, Maza, and Anna. Are you present? If you're in the room, please press the request to speak button if you're not on the floor. You can see Martha's got a giant poster. We are puny little posters compared to Martha. Yes. Don't forget the hashtags, hashtag health over profit and hashtag TRIPS waiver. And I learned something specially for this rally. American Sign Language, health over profit. So health over profit. For our friends who are hearing impaired, we learned something new today. We are going to have to stick to strict time limits. I think all rally speakers are supposed to be speaking for 3 minutes. And we have multiple speakers from across movements and various organizations around the world. And I'm going to start with the first block of this rally, which is the report from the community. What has been the impact of WTO and vaccine apartheid? I think all our speakers earlier today clearly pointed in that direction, the evidence of a vaccine apartheid, where the poor and the global south are suffering. So what has been the impact of WTO and vaccine apartheid on community, and how is your community taking care of each other? I'd like to introduce, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Meena Jagannath, the Director of Global Programs at the Movement Law Lab, which has been key in vaccine advocacy and which are who are co-sponsors of today's rally. Over to you, Meena. Welcome. And unmute.
Thank you for the energy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is my deepest honor to kick off today's rally. And we have an amazing set of speakers who will be talking about the impact of vaccine inequity, vaccine apartheid. As we know from the unfolding of the climate crisis to the COVID-19 pandemic, every day we're witnessing how much our lives are intertwined across borders. We know that this pandemic simply won't end until all countries come together to put the lives of billions of people before the interests of a handful of pharmaceutical companies. But a few key governments, especially those in the global north, like the United Kingdom, the European Union, Germany in particular, Switzerland, Norway, and Canada, have withheld their support for a TRIPS waiver that would remove intellectual property barriers on life-saving COVID healthcare technologies. Rather than cooperate internationally to end the pandemic as soon as possible, these countries have chosen to prioritize the intellectual property rights of companies over our health. India, South Africa, and dozens of other states originally made the TRIPS waiver request in October 2020, over 1 year ago. And states failed to act back then, and then they further delayed a decision on it this past summer, despite watching the Delta variant ravage through populations, causing a devastating number of deaths and an immeasurable economic damage. And as a result, we have lost a year of progress that we could have made in building up capacity to produce vaccines regionally and to strengthen our global response to the pandemic. Big Pharma will have us think that there's an ample supply of vaccines, that we need not fret because donations are on the way to low-income companies. But we know that this is paternalistic and short-sighted. What happens when another variant surfaces? What happens as we go through our fourth and fifth waves? We'll see vaccine hoarding by rich countries continue, and low-income countries again will go to the back of the line. It's time we stop this cycle. All people across the globe deserve access to vaccines and healthcare as public goods. And that's why we're here today. We in civil society will not accept this outrage in silence. For us, a failure to act has deadly consequences. We, doctors, nurses, parents, children, lawyers, activists everywhere, are watching and speaking out. As you'll hear today, we're working in solidarity across the global north-south divide to tell rich countries in the WTO to stop trading with our lives. We're organized and prepared to use all avenues, including legal avenues, to hold states accountable to their human rights obligations. We are ready. Next week's WTO Ministerial Conference will be one of the most consequential meetings in history in terms of the future of international cooperation in global health. The time is now for governments to choose our lives over the profits of Big Pharma. So we are here today, and you will hear from many speakers asking you to take action and add your voice to the millions calling for a people's vaccine and a TRIPS waiver now. Thank you so much. I will hand it over.
Yes, thank you so much, Mina. Absolutely, this is why we're here. We might be online, but that doesn't mean that we aren't fighting day in and day out to get this TRIPS waiver, to get the access to vaccines, medicines, technologies, everything that our people need. We're going to start with our first speaker, who is Mr. Issam Yunus, who is joining us from El Mizan in Gaza. Issam, please, you have the floor for your intervention. Thank you so much.
Well, I'll speak in Arabic as was decided. شكرا جزيلا بسمة وشكرا للجميع. سعيد جدا بهذا اللقاء.
Thank you, Basma. Thanks, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you in this very, very important rally, very important and very timely meeting. Speaking about a vaccine, about WTO. Of course, I have to say that the situation in Gaza is very exceptional. Of course, you know that Gaza Strip is under occupation, under a discriminatory occupation. And the victims of these discriminatory policies are the civilians, of course, who are not receiving any protection by the international law. Everybody can hear me well? So Gaza Strip and the Palestinian territories, of course, are under occupation, and the occupation government is refusing to respect the rights of the Palestinian people, and this occupation is still actually moving on with its exactions and atrocities. Today, the Gaza Strip is under siege, and this siege has a huge impact on people's lives, on people's health. Today, there are total restrictions on movements and on trade, and of course this has a huge impact on health in particular. Today, not to speak about, of course, the access to vaccine, the access to medication, and that is still restricted to the residents of Gaza Strip. Today, in Gaza, we have a lack of fundamental health services, basic health services. If you need any health service, you have to be referred to a service center that is outside Gaza Strip. However, to be able to go out of the Strip, you need an authorization by the Israeli occupation, by the Israeli authorities. For example, all cancer patients have to be transferred outside Gaza Strip, and by the time the authorization comes, sometimes the patient dies, or his or her situation worsens before this authorization comes for them to be transferred. So individuals' movements are hugely restricted. there are thousands of patients who passed away before the authorization was given to them to be transferred to another healthcare center outside the Gaza Strip. Many of them were women and children. The same restrictions apply also on trade and on the movement of goods and products. There was a red line document, what is called the red lines document, that was elaborated by the army a few years ago, and this document actually mentions the calories and the minimum calories that the people need in order to survive, and below this amount of calories, of course, people will not be able to survive. However, today, because Gaza is under siege, even this document is not respected, and a lot of food products, food items are not available in Gaza Strip, and you can imagine the impact of this reality on people's health, especially in times of the pandemic. So today, I repeat, the Israeli occupant is violating the international law that is supposed to protect the rights of the Palestinian people that live in occupied Palestinian territories. So, and of course, this is making it very hard for us to overcome the pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Report from the ground. It's my pleasure now to introduce Marta Grisales from Comité Ambiental on using the comic produced by ESCR-Net. There was a comic produced a few weeks ago on combating the corporate capture of the health system. So Marta, please share with us what you've been doing with that comic on the ground.
And I do believe we have a short video that we will try to play. We're going to cross our fingers and let's see if we can get that up.
Fingers crossed. Let's try it.
Many thanks. I don't have a lot of time. What I want to say, you saw through this video some of the actions, some of the activities that we have done with the intention of creating a political education activities to share this comic. The ESCR-Net has developed with members with the intention to not be incautious and to share this information that is so important for all. Before mentioning the activities, I want to say that this phenomenon of corporate capture that has been implemented by economical elites are exercising an undue influence on the decision process, not only regionally, but also nationally and internationally. And they have done this in order to benefit themselves instead of respecting human rights, and also other issues like environmental justice that are mining these concepts that are fundamental for everybody's life. We have shared this comic in our city in Colombia. It is a news portal that we uploaded the first comic that was about the corporate capture of the UN on the 23rd of February, and we uploaded it to this portal and we linked it to Facebook and YouTube, so it has a bigger impact. Also, WhatsApp groups of what Comité Ambiental is part of, with different national platforms and regional platforms. We have used it to distribute it with our groups that we've been working with. Now recently a magazine came out from Comité Ambiental that is called SOS, and we published number 6. We're still creating 7. In number 6, magazines like this, we published the comic of corporate capture from the UN about the health system. I also have to say we have done a presentation in public squares. We printed them very big in public, so people that were walking by could read and say and ask us about it. But since it has been designed so creatively, very dynamic, it makes it so easy for everybody to read. We did this on the 24th of September during a global campaign where we also participated with different groups in the city. I have to say we are distributing the comic in other groups nationally, like the Alliance Against Fracking, the environmental movement, networks that protect the environment, where we have internal schools and programs, and inside the capacity building that we developed on the 11th of December is to have a space dedicated to corporate capture so we can do this workshop. So basically this is what we've been doing. I believe that these small exercises that we do inside of the organizations of movements is very important, because we are showing what this concept involves and what it means, and that we have to be very aware of a global system that is affecting all of us. Many thanks.
Up next, we have Najwa, who is joining us from the Tunisian Association of Democratic Women, AFTD. Najwa, you have the floor.
شكرا. Thank you. Of course, the association that I'm representing today is the Tunisian Association of Women in Tunisia. I am based in North Africa, and this association is working on women's rights. The association works on defending women's rights and on promoting total equality, total gender equality. The association is also very active against gender-based violence, and today we are working on reproductive health, sexual health, and fundamental rights. Before the pandemic, the situation in Tunisia was very, very bad. Health services were mediocre, and particularly health services in public healthcare centers. In Tunisia, at some point in time before the pandemic, we had two totally different levels of healthcare services. The public healthcare services that were of a very bad quality, and the good quality healthcare services that were provided by the private sector, however, that at a very, very expensive price. And therefore,
health became only luxury for those who could afford it. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, the healthcare system collapsed once and for all. And all of the healthcare services that were already vulnerable and of a bad quality became even worse. Public hospitals were not able to receive any more patients. The numbers of beds were not enough at all to care for all of the people who got the virus. Oxygen was not available. And oxygen machines, of course, were very rare. In some areas, doctors and nurses had to choose between patients based on their age or based on their health situation. And this was really very, very difficult and very hard. Ignorance on the one hand and the lack of responsibility from the government side, on the other hand, put us sometimes in situations where families or communities or even the local authorities refused to take care of people who died because of COVID, and they refused to bury them properly, so which was also a violation of human dignity. The healthcare workers sometimes were not ready anymore to provide the services and to do their duty, to assume their duties properly, and this of course contributed to aggravating the situation and to an increasing number of cases. Besides, some other people already had other diseases, and so other diseases on top of the pandemic made the situation even worse. Many healthcare workers also got the virus themselves, and many of them died because of the lack of good health services. Tunisia saw a very high number of deaths because of COVID-19. We had more than 25,000 deaths by COVID-19 in Tunisia. And regarding the vaccine, of course, Tunisia was not one of the countries who was able to provide the vaccine freely. But there was some kind of solidarity between states and people, and this, of course, allowed the Tunisian citizens to have access to the vaccine, however, at a very minimal rate yet. And Tunisia was one of the last countries to receive vaccination and to start the vaccination campaign because, of course, of the lack of resources and because of inappropriate government choices that delayed actually the arrival of the vaccine to Tunisia. Today, almost 5 million people have received the vaccine in Tunisia. However, this number is still minimal relatively to the total number of residents in Tunisia and relatively to the situation of healthcare, of the healthcare system in Tunisia. And of course, this always pushes us to say that the souls are more important than profit. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Najwa. And now, for those of us who have been discussing and concerned on the intersectional impacts of COVID, here's Mandy Mudarikwa from the Women's Legal Center. Over to you, Mandy.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, good morning again to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to make the statement. The development of COVID tests, vaccines, and related therapeutics has indeed been one of the key global developments in emergency response to COVID. Worryingly, COVID tests and vaccines and related therapeutics are among the most unequally distributed health commodities, largely more accessible and available to high-income countries with predominantly white populations in the global north. Statistics as of 15 October 2021 state that high-income countries have procured over 7 billion confirmed vaccines, while low-income countries have only procured about 300 million doses. The inequitable availability of access to healthcare, COVID tests, vaccines, and related therapeutics, and other life-saving measures has laid bare the ongoing discrimination that women face in their daily lives. Women in their diversity, especially those of color, have disproportionately been impacted by COVID-19 pandemic, including in shouldering the greatest burden of healthcare and unpaid care work. Gender remains a key determinant of health in all countries around the world. This is primarily because women are predominantly considered only as caregivers or mothers within the context of healthcare. Further, with social protections overburdened and collapsing because of economic downfall caused by COVID-19, women have filled the gaps in social protection systems as they've always done. This is because when social security systems are not able to feed all children, women are predominantly taking steps to feed them. When hospitals are unable to provide continued care to COVID-positive patients, or when families are not able to afford hospital services, women step in and provide the healthcare that is needed. This has translated into intensified care burdens and intensifying the already unfair social distribution of care work that women were already shouldering. The intersectional impact of discrimination is also experienced by other groups who are marginalized and vulnerable as a result of their diverse orientations, their gender identities and expression and sex characteristics, their age, refugee status, people living with HIV, immigration status, persons with disabilities, people with albinism, older women, among other people that live on the periphery of power. For example, persons with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics are often criminalized in many countries, and as a result do not seek healthcare out of fear of being identified according to their sexual orientation or gender identity. Even in this context, where there's no criminalization, discrimination is rife and equally hinder access to healthcare. The ability to then access healthcare is entirely dependent on the willingness of those providing healthcare to assist them. This has continued to be the case even in instances where people are COVID positive. Today, I stand here as a Black woman amplifying the call for critical and transformative action, which in my view is needed immediately if we as a world are taking the call seriously to substantively transform and effect change, and importantly, bring about just and equal access to healthcare and address gender discrimination and racial discrimination that continue to plague our communities. We have watched in anguish how capitalism, power, and self-preservation have continued to be more important than human rights and lives, especially of those who are already excluded because they are not seen as mattering. They're already isolated because they shouldn't be part of the main society because of their difference. And those who continue to be on the periphery of power because their voices, even though they have them, are not heard, are not considered important. And so despite the continued threat of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've continued to be excluded, marginalized, and isolated. Today, we say, I stand here, join everyone, and we say, don't trade with our lives. Our lives are not for profit. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you so much. Next, we have Alejandra Scampini, joining us from Poder. Ale, please. You're on mute, Ale. No, can't hear you, Ale. No, I think you're muted on the screen. If you just... it's showing muted.
Hola, hola. Ahora sí. Okay. Bueno, muchas gracias. Voy a hablar en...
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in Spanish. It's a pleasure to be in this social action moment and global action for the patent waiver. I want to zoom in corporate capture, zoom in. Many of the reflections we heard from all social movements have been working in this, and how the decision making of our governments when it comes to health was co-opted by corporations with threats to access to health. So something that we've been developing for decades in our regions with the pretext of liberalization with market in the name of innovation many times, or security. We see right now in this moment of COVID, of this pandemic that's affecting millions of people, the corporate elites are putting a lot of pressure in the decision makers on national, regional, and international level to have an influence in legislation and political making when it comes to health, which means to decide who lives and who dies. From Poder, together with the ESCR network and other allies, we think it's a very important moment to call the attention for the capture of state. In this COVID pandemic, what we've seen is this alarming corporate capture that's putting in the center the lack of health services on a global level. As it has been said at the beginning, the question of intellectual property. Since the beginning, many of the pharmaceutical companies that are leaders right now, and they're having big benefits in the name of vaccines, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Sanofi, GlaxoSmithKline, they are part of an international federation of associations of pharmaceutical companies. They are arguing and calling for the protection of information on vaccines, on the patents, in the name of that. This is a call to be able to produce more vaccines, actually, and be able to innovate, and they are appealing to technology. It's absurd that these corporations are arguing that intellectual property is fundamental part of their industry, and that we need to protect it. So this what we're saying in this rally today is that with or without crisis, with or without pandemic, these pharmaceutical companies, that they have the ability to also and the billionaires that are behind them and are funding these companies, with or without pandemic, were undermining the right to health before and influencing policies. I would like also to talk about public funds in a moment in which our governments are putting millions, as is the case of what we documented with ESCR network, where we said that biotech, those who are behind Pfizer, receive $445 million from the public funds. Funds that should be for the benefit of people. Well, this money has been used to manufacture vaccine, but we say, okay, so these are the vaccines of the people, and these public resources that have been derived to the pharmaceutical to use to manufacture vaccines in detriment of states helping policies in moments of pandemic, more reason to claim it as ours. In our region, in Latin America, it's been documented also by people like Poder. In this moment of massive buy of vaccine, there's a lot of opacity, and it's and the governments are desperate to buy these vaccines. So quick laws are passed in order to give indemnity and confidentiality to the pharmaceutical companies. So we are delegating our right to be informed, or what are we receiving in our bodies, and what are we signing, what contract. At least 13 countries in Latin America, at least 13 countries in my region passed new laws and they have given indemnizations to the pharmaceuticals in the name of buying more vaccines. So from Poder, we would also like to use this rally not only to call the attention for this question of corporate capture, but also in the apartheid of vaccines that this has brought together, especially for women. The Feminists for People vaccine is presenting this and is claiming this. We're looking at why the production of vaccines should also be alerting on the impact, the different impact for women. This COVID, with its multiple intersectional causes, it has made more clear that this inequality and all the impacts that has had towards men or women. So we have been saying this for a long time. Sorry, Alejandra, yeah, sorry, we need to stop you. Oh my God, so many things I didn't say.
A lot more to get through, so I'm sorry to interrupt.
Your passion is infectious, and we need that. And thank you, Alejandra. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Alana Kembabazi from the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights in Uganda. Alana, you're up. Can you put yourself on camera and unmute yourself? Alana, yes, over to you.
Yes. Thank you. This system is broken. We in the Global South have always known that. It's a system that has consistently put profit over lives. A system where there's corporate capture of the right to health. We saw it with HIV, like those earlier spoke about. So why are we still fighting? Why are we here today? Because our lives, again, are on the line. Because we have to bury our loved ones, just like we recently did in a devastating second wave. Because we had to deposit land titles as private facilities demanded them to offer basic emergency care as our public health systems failed. Because at the height of Uganda's devastating wave, at an online memorial, I asked, how do people handle so much loss and grief when the deaths are avoidable? How do we move on when sharing technology for vaccines and therapeutics could have avoided this? We must continue this fight because our children's education is on the line. Children have been out of school in Uganda for 2 years as schools close to avoid COVID-19. Child labor is on the rise as a result of economic decimation of lockdown measures. Many children will never make it back to school because our already resource-constrained governments have to face unconscionable choices. Lockdown and people die because of hunger, like we saw with the people who were boiling stones just to distract the kids or lighting themselves up on fire, or open up and they die because of COVID, like we saw earlier on in the year. So today we come together as activists, as lawyers, as human rights people, and bear witness that this is not okay. Since May 2021, a group of human rights networks and their members, allied organizations, we've been convening, discussing legal mechanisms, discussing human rights mechanisms, and we petitioned the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, special procedure mandate holders to put out something that says, listen, this is not okay. Member states, pharmaceutical companies, the WTO, a legal brief. We are looking into litigation. I can't underscore enough that we must continue. It's easy to get discouraged, like I do most days, but we cannot forget that they must pass the TRIPS waiver because we can't rely on the status quo, one where we're relying on ad hoc paltry donations, mere leftovers given after these countries have vaccinated their populations. We deserve better. They must stop trading for our lives, with our lives, and we must continue to push for them to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alana. Thank you so much. Next, we are going to keep it moving. We're going to bring back Lina from MSF to offer her intervention and to continue to speak about the many ways, as Alana mentioned, that we are resisting and we are pushing back and demanding that states and pharmaceuticals be held accountable for the destruction and the damage that they have caused. Lina, please, thank you.
So, as Medicine Sans Frontières, as people, as medical people who've treated in low, middle, and upper middle income countries. We have first-hand experience of seeing how the intellectual property system works. We've seen that it does not work for neglected diseases and population. It does not deliver the vaccines and drugs we need for neglected and polarized populations, particularly for diseases such as TB, malaria, Ebola, and many others. We've also seen firsthand, as Medicines Sans Frontières, firsthand loss of lives due to intellectual property barriers, which have led to very high prices, where governments end up not providing a particular treatment, whether it's TB or HIV or even cancer or even insulin, and actually ration treatments to people and patients. In the pandemic, where we are seeing firsthand a situation where many of the therapeutics, for example, that are routinely available in high-income countries are very difficult to obtain in developing countries. Most importantly, because the manufacturing capacity has been concentrated into the hands of a few countries. And I would just like to highlight not just the disparities on vaccines, but also the disparities on therapeutics. And I would just like to highlight that while we are looking for justice on and change on the intellectual property system for COVID, by no means is the battle over, because the intellectual property system continues to take the lives of women who have breast cancer, women who develop cervical cancer and cannot afford the HPV vaccine. I could give you countless other examples of how, for example, diabetic patients have had struggled against pharmaceutical corporations because of the cartelization on insulin and using IP as a mechanism to keep out competition. So I would just simply say TRIPS waiver is the rallying cry of all of us to work on human rights and access to treatment and vaccines. So it should be the beginning and not the end. So irrespective of what the outcomes of the TRIPS waiver are, we are all together in this together. So that's all I have to say. And MSF will continue to speak up for its patients who have not been able to speak up in their own right. And lastly, I would say is this: COVID proves that governments can invest in R&D. 90% of the funding is ours, people's. Yet we do not own the outcomes of R&D. And that is something that we really need to change. If we are funding R&D, then we need to own that R&D as well and have access to it. Lastly, I would just say this, not as MSF, but as a woman of color living in India. I think the IP system is a form of colonization. My IP system in India, IP system in South Africa was part of the colonization process. And we have inherited that system, and that system got globalized through the World Trade Organization. So if we are to look at changing the intellectual property system, we must talk about decolonization and anti-discrimination issues within the human rights movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Miriam Sage-Mas from the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. Miriam, you're going to talk about domestic litigation to defend our rights from corporate capture.
Yes, thank you. So as lawyers, as a lawyer based in Germany, but I'm also speaking on behalf of my colleagues from Norway, the UK, and Canada. So at the national level, we want to challenge the position of those governments that are still not supporting the waiver. Despite the fact that governments have provided public funds to pharma companies for creating valid COVID-19 vaccines, these governments do not treat the knowledge that has been produced as a common good. And we believe they really need to, and they should. They are rather protecting the interests of these companies in profit-making rather than protecting the right to health of their populations, but also of the populations outside of their countries. We, as lawyers based in the global north, want to challenge this position, and we particularly want to challenge the position of the governments of Canada, the UK, Norway, and Germany. we will be filing letters of claim demanding of these governments to fulfill their obligations under international law to protect the right to health and to put people before profit. These obligations are both on states with respect to their own population, as well as of states of the population living outside of their territory. And I just want to name the very few of the human rights obligations that we will try to litigate in national courts. Under Article 2 of the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, governments must adopt measures individually and through international assistance and cooperation, especially economic and technical, to realize the right that are protected under ISCR. The Article 12 of the ESCR guarantees the right of everyone to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. This article creates an explicit obligation to prevent, treat, and control epidemic diseases. And this article also specifies that states have an obligation to create conditions to ensure all people that have access to medical services and medical attention. We as lawyers based in the Global North are not willing to accept our government's position to keep the status of vaccine apartheid, but we want to challenge them so that the pandemic can truly be fought for everyone so that everyone has access to medicines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And, with that, we're actually going to bring up Ana Caistor Erandar from Progressive International, who is going to look, for example, at the ways that states like Canada are putting up every defense from sharing the intellectual property, the know-how that could allow for mass vaccine production. So Ana, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today for this really important initiative. I'm so glad we could all come together on this. So I'm part of the Progressive International, which has brought together an initiative for vaccine internationalism, which I will talk about today. As we've discussed here today, at least less than 5% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, compared with over 3/4 of people in richer nations. As has been discussed, this is a vaccine apartheid, and it is totally avoidable. Since the start of the pandemic, we have found ourselves in a situation where rich countries have hoarded much of the world's vaccine supply and are preventing the rest of the world from producing their own vaccines. This has forced countries in the global south to rely on charity and the failed COVAX vaccine sharing mechanism. At Progressive International, we brought together progressive governments and politicians with activists and representatives from generic pharmaceutical companies to try and overcome the barriers to vaccine access and share limited resources. We met with governments from across the global south who had been crowded out of negotiations on vaccine purchases by rich countries. As one foreign minister of a low-income country said to me, "We have the money to pay for these vaccines. We're being blocked from negotiations with pharma companies by rich countries who have pushed their way to the front of the queue and bought up all current and future supply." It's clear the end of this pandemic is being artificially delayed by rich country governments and the WTO patent protections. In this moment, every laboratory, every generic pharma factory must be empowered to produce and deliver more vaccines for everyone everywhere. Otherwise, this pandemic will not end. We know there are numerous factories able and ready to produce life-saving COVID-19 vaccines, and they are being blocked from doing so by the WTO patent protections. There is a live case that we can look at which demonstrates this, involving Bolivia and Canada. Several months ago, the government in Bolivia reached an agreement with a Canada-based drug manufacturer called Biolis to acquire 15 million doses of desperately needed vaccines for the country. But Prime Minister Trudeau's government has refused to grant the compulsory license that would enable Biolis to produce the vaccines. So while Trudeau on the world stage claims he has not stood in the way of global access to vaccines, we have at this moment a Global South government asking him directly to let them buy vaccines from a Canadian pharma company which is ready to produce, and Yet Canada will not approve the trade mechanism to allow them to do so. A trade mechanism, the compulsory license, which it has actively touted at the World Trade Organization as a reason for not supporting the TRIPS waiver. It is really well turned upside down stuff, this. As Benjamin Blanco, the Bolivian Minister of Trade and Investment, said about the situation, people in countries with limited access to COVID vaccines cannot wait for the bureaucratic processes at the WTO to reach their conclusion. They are losing their lives and livelihoods to this virus every single day. This situation is urgent. We need to end this pandemic as quickly as possible by securing COVID-19 vaccines for all. We must overcome the nexus of big pharma and global North governments standing in the way and secure a WTO TRIPS waiver now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Earlier on in the rally, Lena referred to the need for decolonization and anti-discrimination, that our struggle is not just about the TRIPS waiver, but about tackling decolonization. So it's I'm really happy to introduce Ohene Ampofo-Anti from the Center for Economics and Social Rights, who's actually going to tell us about one form of resistance and involving the complaint to the CERD. Over to you, Ohene.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Debbie, and thank you to all the speakers for today, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. It's actually my first time speaking in public on behalf of my organization, so it's quite a special moment for me. Good morning or good afternoon, friends and colleagues. Buenos días y buenas tardes, mis amigos y mis colegas. As previously said, my name is Ohene Ampofo-Anti, and I'm a program associate with the Center for Economic and Social Rights. I am based in Pretoria, South Africa. So on October 25th, which was a Monday, about 3-4 weeks ago, a group of organizations, including mine and several others, filed a petition with the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in terms of its urgent inquiry procedure. The essence of our petition was that by opposing a TRIPS waiver before the WTO, the US, UK, Norway, Germany, and Switzerland were violating their international obligations to protect the rights to life and health, as well as eliminate all forms of racial discrimination, both within and between states. In terms of within states, we showed that where there is data available, it is clear that the inequitable access to vaccines has a racially disparate impact on racial and ethnic minorities, Black people, Indigenous people, women in their diversity, LGBT populations, persons with disabilities, and people at the intersections of the aforementioned grounds. Furthermore, there's inequity between states. This is because there's a racial divide between the global north and global south, which is reproducing colonial-era racial hierarchies and patterns of racial subordination. The racial divide is clear from the statistics which were documented in September of this year, which some colleagues have already mentioned. So from September, we know that the stats said that 73% of doses had gone to 10 of the richest countries in the world, whilst by the end of October, it was estimated that a mere 6% of the entire continent of Africa has been vaccinated. But in addition to vaccine inequity, there's also been the development gains of the global south have also been undermined. Some studies have shown that countries which fail to vaccinate 60% of their population by the middle of next year will lose a staggering $2.3 trillion between 2022 and 2025. So what is the relief that we are seeking from the committee? We have called on the committee to make three main findings or relief. Firstly, that they call upon these recalcitrant states to support a TRIPS waiver, not just in respect of vaccines, but all healthcare technologies, including therapeutics, diagnostics, PPE, etc. Secondly, to provide technology and knowledge transfers. And thirdly, to keep disaggregated data along race, ethnicity, and intersecting grounds, as well as providing education and outreach in Indigenous and minority languages. In terms of going forward and advocacy, our colleague Mandy Mudarikwa has drafted a great letter, which we would like colleagues to sign. So far, we've had over 50 signatures and endorsements from individuals and organizations around the world. And I can drop the link to the letter in the chat. We regard this petition as part of a larger effort to bring vaccine apartheid to an end. A luta continua. Amandla.
Thank you so much, Ohene. Absolutely. This system of intellectual property, like Lena mentioned, is not only colonial, but it is absolutely racist to its core, and that is why we continue to resist. To bring us home, I'm really excited to introduce Maza Sayum from the People's Vaccine Alliance and from the African Alliance. We've been calling for a people's vaccine since the start of the pandemic. We knew that we were going to come to this day where we would have vaccines because we knew that this pandemic was affecting those in power, and we knew that they would put money into supporting a vaccine. And now we are seeing how that vaccine absolutely has exacerbated and exploited inequalities across gender lines, across racial lines, across class and regional lines as well. And so this fight for a people's vaccine is the one that unites all of us. Like Lena mentioned, whose money and whose taxes went into producing this vaccine? It wasn't Pfizer, it wasn't Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca, right? It was people like you and me and the millions around the world whose public dollars supported the development of these vaccines. And so with that, I'm very excited to bring up Maza, who will bring us home and into our closing section.
Thank you so much, Basma, and thank you everyone for having me at this amazing, amazing rally. Thank you, Debbie, for keeping the energy up. I need some of your chocolate treats and your espresso and whatever you've been drinking over there in Bangkok. So it's really daunting to be the last person after all of you amazing speakers. As Basma said, I am with the African Alliance, which is a Pan-African feminist organization, which came up doing work around HIV research advocacy and sexual and reproductive health and gender issues. We joined the People's Vaccine Alliance at the end of last year and have been working to coordinate and lead the work of the People's Vaccine Alliance in Africa for the last 8 months or so. I met Poder and Ale through the People's Vaccine Alliance. Progressive International is also a member. So I think that's the first thing that I would say is I would encourage all of you who are interested and motivated, as I know that everyone is, to please consider joining the People's Vaccine Alliance. We're a growing alliance of 80 organizations, activists, lawyers, economists, former world leaders who are fighting for a people's vaccine. And any skill that you have, if you like to write, there are opportunities for writing op-eds and influencing people. If you're a creative person and want to make graphics, comics, films, there's an opportunity there for offline actions for people who can actually get in the streets, because as one of our colleagues mentioned, some of our countries are still in lockdown, so cannot do offline actions. But for those countries where that is possible, those actions are happening, online actions with social media. So everything is there. Please do consider joining us, and I will tweet a link for where people can contact us after this if you'd like to join the People's Vaccine Alliance. I would just like for the people who are interested in just a reminder of some of the apartheid, I would like to point out the fact that since the TRIPS waiver application was put in, 4 million people have died of COVID. So as people have been wasting time, we have lost another 4 million people to this pandemic. And speaking of the money that is being made, and Alejandra and others have touched on this, at the moment, Pfizer and Moderna are earning a combined profits of $1,000 per second, every second. So I can't even count up. I failed math in high school, but in the 2 hours that we've been together in this rally, just count up the amount of money that these pharmaceutical companies have made. 5 pharma CEOs have become billionaires during this pandemic. And just in terms of, and my brother Ohene mentioned this as well, in Africa, not even 7% of people have been fully vaccinated. If we look at the countries that are blocking the TRIPS waiver, we have Switzerland with 65% of people vaccinated, Germany at 67%, the UK at 68%. In the UK, since booster shots started in September, 20% of people have received booster shots. That's 3 times the percentage of people that are fully vaccinated in Africa. And also there are some countries, such as my own country of Ethiopia, which is still under 2% vaccinated. So imagine what that means. There are healthcare workers, there are grandparents, there are people with morbidities. We had Sibongile reminding us of the situation of people living with HIV and the additional burdens that they are faced with in the face of COVID. And I just wanted to highlight, one of the joys of being able to sit here and listen is hearing what other people have had to say. We had our elder colleague Azra from Pakistan say, scientific knowledge is meant to benefit people, not to make profits. Last year, the big challenge that we all faced was science, right? Would the scientists be able to find a solution to this deadly pandemic? We passed the scientific test with flying colors, and now we're failing when it comes to inequality. Something that happened last week, I don't know if you all heard, there was a meeting where Dr. Tedros from the WHO and Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, were at the same meeting, and Dr. Tedros was calling for more equality, and Bourla said to him, stop being emotional. You're being overly emotional about this. So this is, again, to point out the fact that our lives, the lives of people of color, people in Africa, Latin America, the global South, women, transgender people, are not seen as important. For those people in the global North who are kneeling at football matches or kneeling at other events, if Black lives matter in the UK and in the US, they should matter in Africa. Indigenous lives should matter all over the world. So that's just something that I want to highlight when we're told that we're being too emotional. These are the same people who told us during the AIDS pandemic that we in Africa would not be able to adhere to our treatments because we didn't know how to tell time. We didn't have watches, that we would develop resistance. So we've been here before, and that's just something that I want to remind people. We have been here before. People like Lina, Sibongile made sure that we won that battle. We will win this battle. The TRIPS waiver must be approved. We have no choice. So just another thing that I wanted to touch on, which Alejandra also touched on, and also Anna, is the need for the capacity to be built in the global South. We have the capacity to make vaccines and medications. We've made them for years. When the CEO of Pfizer says it's not possible, they don't know how, that is complete nonsense. But I just want to highlight that at the moment, 99% of vaccines that are administered in Africa are imported. That needs to change. So part of that is making sure that the capacity is built. That's one of the main calls of the People's Vaccine Alliance, in addition to the TRIPS waiver, is that capacity building must happen and that rich country governments must use all legal and policy tools to require the Western pharma companies to share COVID-19 data, know-how, technology. There is a mechanism in place for this, CTAP. Not one of the big pharma companies has signed up to it. Just today, we heard that a Spanish entity did sign up, but it wasn't Pfizer, it wasn't Moderna. We really need to push them to sign up to this entity in order to share their data. And finally, obviously the TRIPS waiver is our first call, and that does need to happen. But we would encourage these rich countries that are blocking the TRIPS waiver, but at the same time hoarding vaccines, to live up to their promises and redistribute the vaccines that they're hoarding. There's been all this media fanfare about the charity that they're going to give us. So far, not even 20% of those vaccines have been shared. So if you're going to talk all the talk, come forward and share some of those vaccines that you are hoarding. And I just wanted to quote what our colleague Lina said from India. She said, what we want is change and not charity. And I just want to point out that we're not asking for charity, we're asking for justice. This vaccine apartheid is not only immoral, it is foolish, because the virus will continue to mutate and this pandemic will be prolonged. So I just want to thank everyone so much for the invite. Please join the People's Vaccine Alliance. And just to highlight what Basma and others have been saying, stop trading with our lives. Our lives matter. We will win. We have to win. There is no choice. We will go forward. Amandla, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maza.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And this is amazing. This is amazing. We've had 6 speakers at the teach-in. We've had 12 speakers in this intense, amazing online rally. Thank you to all the speakers, to all the people who introduced them, and to our energetic interpreters and our tech support. So to close, this is the end. To close, I'm inviting all speakers from the earlier sessions to please request the floor so that you can join us for a photo shoot. So anyone who wants to join us for a photo shoot, please request. Yeah, I've got the request. Mandy, you're here. Dan, you're here. Is there anybody else?
Yes, and as they're coming, we want to keep this energy high. Maza, thank you so much for closing us on the importance of continuing this fight. It's not just about the TRIPS waiver, it's around this fight for justice. And we are going to be, we might not be able to go to Geneva for the WTO ministerial. We might just be online, but that doesn't mean that our voices and the voices of our community aren't going to be heard. And so we are also inviting folks to join us on social media. I'm going to drop, or Esther or someone will drop the links in the chat for you to send a tweet to the heads of state and heads of state in Canada, in the UK, in Switzerland, and Norway, to the heads of big pharma who are blocking this waiver, who are becoming millionaires and billionaires, as Maza pointed out. So please join us back on the floor, all speakers, and turn to social media. If you can send out a tweet, we have a link in Spanish and in English. You're absolutely welcome to tweet out in any language that you prefer. But we do want to keep this energy up. This conference that's happening next week at the ministerial is not by any means the end of the line. This is just one stop. We will continue fighting. We will continue moving until justice is a reality for all of us.
Okay, is everyone in the room? Basma, how are you going to play this?
I think we're all here. Yes, I think we're all here. If you have your signs, you can throw them up. If you have any other imagery you want to put up, I think we are going to take a photo. Let me just check with my behind the scenes, I don't know, team, and see if we are good to go. TRIPS waiver on 3. 1, 2, 3.
TRIPS waiver!